Now, for more on that story, we're joined in studio by 350.org Africa Arab team leader, Ferial Adam. Ferial, a very good morning to you and welcome to AM.
Thank you.
Now, it was a big march yesterday in New York.
It was massive. I mean, over 300,000 people. It's much more than we expected.
Yes. And it was all over the world as well. There was a number of other cities that participated as well.
Yeah, we had about 2,500 actions and activities around the world in almost 156 countries.
That sounds massive now.
Yeah.
All the local organizations apparently concerned with climate change gathered at the union buildings last week in Pretoria to deliver their petition on climate justice demands to government officials. What was the petition all about and how was the response?
Well, there were a few things to the petition. The one is basically saying to President Zuma that if you're going to New York, and when you get to New York, it needs to be more than just another talk show, that there needs to be actions. But we were also, as national NGOs, at a national level saying, we can't make bold statements at international summits, but here we're actually not doing very well in terms of climate change. So there were calls from various organizations, and some of them relate to climate change specifically in terms of our greenhouse gas emissions, but also in terms of Eskom. You know, Eskom has applied for emissions exemptions. So it linked to all of those issues nationally, that's saying we have to fix up nationally if we're going to make bold statements at an international level.
Now, the South African delegation is going to New York. What do you expect from them when they attend the New York summit?
You know, a lot of people, and that is why I think we had so many people out picketing and protesting globally, is that we've lost faith in this process. We do not think that the talk shops, as we call them now, are going to, get any action. And so I don't think we're going to get some, mind-breaking or mind-blowing achievements on Tuesday. But what we're saying is that now the people are watching you much better.
There was a story that broke last week that it seems like the ozone layer is reviving itself. What's your take on that? And is that maybe part of the solutions in terms of countries emitting less of these pollutants into the air?
Well, it definitely, there's climate change and then there's the ozone layer, which is very two separate issues. And I think that, yes, the ozone layer is kind of healing itself, but there was very much more political will, and you had private sector on board for dealing with the ozone layer. So that's what was the different thing, is that with climate change, there's a lack of political will, and you have a lot of fossil fuel industries lobbying not to go as fast as we want to go. So that's the difference with the two, the Montreal Protocol kind of is over the ozone layer and climate change.
Now, you mentioned earlier that we need to focus local, but if we look at Africa as a continent, how has climate change affected us as a continent here?
Well, it is affecting us in terms of a few things, right? So you know the obvious ones, which is drought and floods and food insecurity. I think if we look at Kenya, for example, northwest of Kenya, they've been going through a drought for over 12 years now. What has happened is that you've got people migrating. So you're going to have a whole range of things that we're going to see more and more of it. Firstly, you're going to see more people having conflict, which is what we talked about before, and people ignored it and thought that's not going to happen. But people are fighting for resources. They're fighting for water. They're fighting for grazing land. We also have, refugees, climate refugees, where they have to leave areas that they've been living in to go and farm elsewhere or actually find somewhere to live. So those things are happening as we speak. But what does that mean for people in urban areas? Is really that the harder it is to get to food and the harder it is to get to water, as people living in Johannesburg, the prices are going to increase, and that's how it's going to impact us. So it's, we can say, well, I've still got water, but, well, maybe not, but it's going to be more expensive. It's going to be more expensive to get food, and that will be directly linked to climate change.
Somebody once said that the next world war is going to be fought over water.
Exactly.
Now, what should be the role of the African countries in curbing this global phenomenon?
Well, I think that, on the African continent, 350 also had a few activities in quite a number of the countries. So, Nigeria, Senegal, Burundi, all calling for the same things and saying that our leaders need to be bold and not invest more in coal, because coal pollutes more, it pollutes our water. So let's go into renewable energy and build that industry on the continent. We cannot afford to ignore the impacts of climate change because we're going to be hardest hit. We also have much harder to adapt because of the issues of poverty. So we need to make sure that when our governments go to these talks, that they take that into cognizance when they're talking about how to deal with climate change.
Now, the United Nations has been pressing rich countries to come up with pledges of between 10 and $15 billion. Do you see that ever happening?
Well, I think it's a difficult one. I think what we're saying as 350.org is that we need to put more pressure on them, and the pressure needs to come from people. And that's where we think we're going to see change. When governments realize that actually they won't be in power because people are going to vote them out because they're not making the right decisions on climate change, then I think they will listen to the people. And right now they're still listening a lot more to the fossil fuel industry.
But it's not just about governments, isn't it? It's also about business, and business should also come to the party. But what is the role then of the business community in gatherings like this one in New York? Can they sway governments? Can they lobby governments to do better?
I think they can, because sadly what they're actually doing is lobbying governments to do worse. So you have very strong fossil fuel industry lobbying at these meetings, which are pushing. They're pushing against the tide,
yes,
because it affects their business, right? And I think that we need to have a counter to that.
What is your next step now? I mean, the summit is going ahead. What is the next step after the summit? What do you expect to come out of the summit in any case?
Look, I think that this talk was a once-off, a one day. And if we look at the climate change negotiations that happened throughout the year and then finally 2 weeks in December, it's been a very slow process. It's 21 years, we haven't reached any kind of significant achievements. I think that what we're saying is that for people on the ground to continue campaigning on issues and to highlight that this is happening now. Climate change is no longer something that's going to happen in the future. It's happening now.
Ferial, thank you so much for joining us here on AM News. That was Ferial Adam joining us here talking about climate change and the role of governments and, of course, the business community.